All right, welcome to the Week 13 Forum. This week we're looking at the backside of disaster relief efforts, and Kevin Fox Gotham is asking whether the recent move towards neoliberalization in public policy actually worked with regard to disaster relief in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. Obviously, we learned that federalism was, not necessarily to blame for the Bush administration's handling of Katrina, but rather the particular conceptualization of federalism and the fact that FEMA's demotion to national security centric department status, a hinterland, kind of hindered disaster response. This week we learned that converting government from actors into contractors probably doesn't lead to more efficient relief efforts, and it doesn't appear to save money either. Um, so how does Gotham describe neoliberalization? What are the key assumptions guiding the neoliberalization of public policy? Do these assumptions seem intuitively plausible or at least appealing to those of you who are more conservative? Is Gotham being fair in his analysis of this approach to public policy? Why does Gotham believe that privatization, one of the key neoliberal approaches, amounts to a kind of downsizing of democracy? What does he think gets lost in privatization? Gotham cites Nancy Jurek, who lays out a description of what she describes as new privatization. What are the key assumptions guiding new privatization? How can the basic conditions required for new privatization be met in formulating policy for disaster relief? Or can they? Why is disaster relief in particular such a difficult policy area to privatize? Um, Gotham cites the confirmation testimony of Joe Albaugh, a name that ought to be familiar to all of us Oklahomans, as he is the current director of the Oklahoma Department of Corrections. Uh, and he thinks that Albaugh's testimony is indicative of the then incoming Bush administration's attitude towards disaster relief. How did Albaugh back in 2001, who had actually been Bush's chief of staff when he was governor of Texas, characterize disaster relief programs? Another reason I like pairing this article with the Berkman and Waterston piece is that Gotham adds another important dimension to FEMA being moved from its status as an independent executive agency to just one of many agencies under the supervision of a cabinet level department. And that is the amount of budgetary instability that was also introduced, right? The Bush administration, uh, you know, pumped $1.3 billion into the agency, into FEMA initially, but then by 2015, $1.5 billion had been diverted from the agency. What kind of impact do you imagine that that kind of budgetary volatility had on the personnel that were actually having to manage the money? Uh, Part of the beauty of neoliberalization is this assumption that rather than having the heavy hand of government picking winners and losers and doing everything inefficiently, you have the idea of government agencies playing the role of contractor, orchestrating the contracting process and leveraging the free market to work miracles. What does Gotham think about that narrative as it's applied to the contracting process in the post-Katrina rebuilding? Um, One of the pieces of evidence that Gotham points to in suggesting that privatizing disaster relief wasn't such a hot idea was that government agencies found themselves relying increasingly on no-bid contracts. What does reliance on a no-bid contract suggest might be absent when you think about the necessary conditions that Jurek is talking about with new privatization? Um, One of the other things that I've been noting is the impact of private contracting on local government. What happened when the city of New Orleans resorted to privatization for rebuilding its infrastructure and its public buildings? Keep in mind as you read this section on local government how prostrated New Orleans had been by Katrina. This is a city that is absolutely dependent on tourism. How long did it take the city to get back even a part of its tourism industry? And what kind of economic impact did that have? One last question. Why does Gotham conclude that privatization is inadvisable as a strategy for disaster relief? How do the circumstances surrounding disasters undermine the presumed benefits that come from privatizing? All right, hopefully I've given you plenty to think about and to discuss this week. As always, if you're confused about the article and how it applies to intergovernmental relations, just throw it out there in the forum. and I'll get to it if I see it. Let's have a great week.